1. So I work at a school, and I do my best not to stand out too much. Working there for about 3 years now. I was off working alone. This was about part way into year 1 there. So I was about the only temp that was working alone most of the time, or sent off to do things that needed done fast. Sadly, doing my best not to stand out in year 1 didn't work. And my lead was, and is, a cool person. He's now one of the only others I hang out with. But back to the story. I was working alone in art down in the mudroom. My dust mask on, I was working as I always did. I knew that about 2 hours in, the others would show up and help me with the rest of it. Not the mudroom, just the rest of the art. As I was working, the sound of something being pulled over the floor got me to stop. Before I had went down to the mudroom, I looked to see how bad the drawing room was. And it was all as it was the day before. I went up to the room and looked in. Now all the drawing desks had moved from sides of the room to being in the center of it. I noped out and went back down to the mudroom. As the other two came in, I told them. Good old Ted went up there with me. He told me they just got there, so it was not them. We opened the door, and all of them had been moved back to the side of the room. He looked at me and told me about the ghosts he has seen, and been told of in art and other spots there at work. It was not too much of a shock, but it made me take notes about all the odd things going on. Last year in August, I had been working with Ted, and we had been put in a T building. Yes, it looks like a lower T. It was one I never liked being alone in. He had a heartache about 4 weeks before. He was back, and after about 2 weeks he was taking off time for a family member's weddings. He told me Thursday he'd see me Monday. I didn't see him next Monday. Come that Wednesday, I was pulled aside and told he had passed away. I was in shock. But later on, I was working with another out of the T building, and the other temp and I about swear to this day that we heard Ted saying, "See you later, kiddo," as we walked out. We looked back and I just replied, "Later, Ted." We both almost ran back to the main building. To this day, I think he likes to look after us all working there. He was that kind of sweetheart of a man. 2. So this happened at the beginning of July 2016. My family had driven up to Boston from North Carolina to see the 4th of July celebration there. We left Boston at around 10 a.m. and ran into traffic jams constantly, prompting my dad to take side roads whenever we hit one. During the drive back, I started feeling nauseous, as I often get carsick. And yet I never get air nor seasick. So I took Dramamine. The Dramamine kept me in a drowsy state for the entire car ride. When we got to Pennsylvania, our car started showing our front right tire was low on air pressure. My dad stopped at a rest area to fill the tire back up with the pump in our trunk. And after that, the low pressure warning disappeared. We continued on our way for many hours until we reached the Virginia-North Carolina border at around 1 a.m. My dad announced this to everyone, waking my sister and I up. By 2 a.m., we were about 20 miles north of a city in North Carolina, infamous for its crime rate. Suddenly, I awake to an extremely loud bang, and the car is swerving all over the road, and my dad is screaming, "What the fuck?" My dad manages to keep the car going for around half a mile before we pulled to the shoulder. We ended up at an intersection of another highway. At this time of night, there was no one out in the road. In fact, in total, we only saw 3 other cars in the half hour we were there. Anyway, my dad hops out of the car and goes around to the right side of the car. When he gets there, He explains to us that the tire had somehow popped, and that he has to change it to the spare. As he gets the spare and the jack from the trunk and starts changing it, my mom calls AAA, as she doesn't trust my dad's skills enough to let him do it by himself. I'm keeping my eyes on the woods as she opens her window and asks my dad, "Where are we?" I need to tell them where we are. My father replies with the name of the intersection, and she tells the AAA representative. A minute later, my mom yells out the window to my dad, "They can be here in 5 to 10 minutes. As she yells this, I see someone just in the tree line run away from where the car is, back in the direction where the tire popped. I shout, "What the fuck was that?" and start to try to get out of the car to give chase or something. A stupid idea. But find I am too drowsy to stand up straight. I get back in the car and my mom asks what I saw, so I tell her. She says it's because I'm too tired from the Dramamine and ignores it. My dad finishes putting the spare on, and we finish our drive back home. The next day, my dad takes the tire to get it replaced, but keep the rim. As they take the rim, they tell him that he needs to take it to a welder because it had a large crack in it. Confused, my dad asked what might have caused it. They said a large heavy object, like a rock or a lead ball hitting it at high speed could have caused it. They also told him that they found nails and bits of razor-sharp metal in the tire itself. My dad was telling a friend of his, a firefighter in the area where the tire popped, about the incident. His friend told him that there had been a rash of carjackings and robberies in the area, with similar methods used. My dad said that I had seen someone running away from us that night, and his friend said that we were probably lucky not to have been robbed or killed. What most people tell us probably happened was someone was hiding in the trees with a slingshot and a trap set on the road. They fired the slingshot as we drove over the trap in hopes of stopping us or causing us to crash so that they could rob or kill us. From then on, we stay in hotels if we can't make it home before 10 p.m. and we're getting a baton to keep in the car with us. I hate to think of what might have happened if my mom hadn't called AAA. 3. I'll give some backstory first. I live in England, and up until I was 7 or 8, I lived in the countryside. By the countryside, I mean Cambridge. I'm pretty sure that's the countryside. Anyway, it was really refreshing to have all the open fields and large houses. Everyone knew everyone. As a 7-year-old, that is really good. But I was a major introvert, and always stayed by myself. One day, me and my family of 5 were taking my dog Bailey for a walk in one of the bigger fields around our house, around a 10-minute walk away. I was off to the side, talking with my imaginary friends, Phoenix, Ethan, and Walter, because I never talked to actual people very often. I remember Ethan commenting on the dog having an injured leg, so I looked over to him. "Mummy, Bailey is hurt," I remember saying. Ethan vanished along with Walter, and Phoenix was left with me and my family. My mum and dad went to examine the dog, and they found a deep cut on his leg. It looked to be made by a knife. She began to panic, and I just looked around until I saw a man retreating into the fields. I point in the direction and my mother screams at him. He appeared to be grinning like a lunatic as he slowly began to vanish into nothing. We took the dog to the vets, and then we all went home. My 10-year-old big brother was a bit shaken, as were my 4-year-old brother and my parents. Me, however, just spent my time talking to my friends who say that they saved my family because the man was going to come get me instead of the dog. We never called the police. What would they say? "Oh, your dog probably cut himself on a rock." The police are very laid back in Cambridge. Anyway, I'm 13 now and living in Surrey. no open fields, and way more people than I can handle. But I still have Phoenix, Ethan, and Walter. They're like guardians of some sort. That's how I think of them anyway. Please be aware the following story contains themes of rape and assault. If you think you may not be able to make it through this story, or will be traumatized in some way by listening to it, please click the timestamps below to move on to the next story. 4. This is my story. It's neither compelling nor engrossing, but it's mine. The story of how I came to love the man who left me for dead by a river on a cold October night. I was 19 and entering my second year at the local university. I couldn't have been more excited to start a fresh new semester. I had started a self-improvement kick over the summer, eating healthier, running, and just generally taking better care of myself. The improvements were noticeable in all aspects of my life, and in keeping with my new regime. I began walking the 5 kilometers to and from school. The semester began as all new school years do, catching up with friends and colleagues, and just enjoying campus life. Before I knew it, midterms were upon us, and I began staying late in the library in order to study and prepare for the onslaught of exams. The days had started getting shorter as winter was approaching, and it would usually be dark by the time I started my walk home. It was a relatively isolated trip, as I lived in a fairly small city, and as I followed the river bank towards my home, I would usually find myself alone. I had to cross below a poorly lit overpass on my walk, which could be intimidating after the sun went down. But I never felt threatened, as I knew the area like the back of my hand, and as far as I knew, there had never been any trouble. It was on my walk home, on a cold October evening, that my nightmare began. I had just passed under the now darkened overpass, where he pounced. I never heard the crush of leaves or the snap of a twig. All I felt was a sudden dull pain, reverberating through my back as though I had been hit by a truck. The wind was knocked out of me, and before I even knew what was happening, I was being dragged to the water's edge by a darkened figure. Over his face he wore a white mask, and he muffled my screams with gloved hands. He pulled out a knife and promised me that if I just did what he said, he'd let me live. Most of the details of the attack are as vague to me as they will remain in this entry. What I do remember about that October night are the words that he said to me. "You're perfect," he whispered as he stroked his hand down my cheek like he was Gollum, and I was his precious. I was beaten, raped, and when he was through, he shoved the blade of his knife into my abdomen, robbed me, and left me for dead. I don't know how I managed it. The world around me was spinning and awash in darkness that knew no end. But I crawled on hands and knees until I found myself in the parking lot of an apartment complex. I was quickly found by the building's security personnel. The police were called, and I spent weeks in the hospital recovering from surgery to repair the damage to my abdomen. I could provide no description of the man, sparing that pale mask, and despite the violence he had inflicted on me, no evidence was found on my body. After a few weeks, my skull bag was found, discarded. Not far from where I was attacked, the usual items were missing, cash and credit cards, but otherwise, everything else was returned to me. Everything except my student ID card. He kept that too. The police said it was not uncommon for these creeps to keep a memento of their victims. The only trace of my attacker that was found was a single fingerprint belonging to a person who wasn't in the system. Time passed, and I began to get stronger and slowly begin the process of putting the incident behind me and beginning my life again. School ended, the summer began, and before I knew it, I was starting classes again. I was enrolled in chem, which meant I had a lab once a week, and despite my decision to not let those events impact my life, I found that I had begun to draw away from people. When it was announced that we needed to pick a lab partner for the term, I was filled with dread. That's when I met Dylan. Dylan was tall, handsome, and soft-spoken. He had a kind manner, and I have to admit, he caught my eye when I had first entered the room. To my surprise, he asked me to be his partner, and I agreed. Dylan seemed more interested in me than any man I had ever met before, and we hit it off immediately. Whenever he ran into me on campus, he would walk me to my bus stop or escort me to my class. By spring of that year, we began dating, and I quickly fell in love. Genuinely seemed to adore me. He understood my past and told me how much he loved the scar in my stomach, and would kiss it and tell me how it was a symbol of my strength and endurance. Things were wonderful, and I finally felt normal again. Months passed, and we were entering our graduating year when things quickly began to fall apart. I had started staying over at Dylan's quite frequently. We'd spend most of our weekends together, and sometimes, when he was called into work, I'd stay at his apartment, work on assignments, and wait for his return. One night, in the middle of a particularly hectic week, I was with Dylan complaining about the course load my professor had assigned. He comforted me, as most boyfriends would, and then gently stroked my cheek and whispered, "You're perfect." It gave me instant chills, and I tried to tell myself that my reaction was normal. In retrospect, I should have listened to my gut, but at the time, it seemed like a harmless, albeit unnerving coincidence. 1 week or so later, I was at his place again, and he was called into work. In truth, I was grateful as it gave me the time I needed to finish a paper I had been struggling with. After a few hours of work, I had perfected it, printed, and began to search for a stapler. I dug through his desk drawer. Nothing. I dug through his junk drawer, and there it was, but something else caught my eye. In the back of the drawer, I saw myself, smiling out at myself, from my student ID card. The very same card I had lost on the day of the attack. It hit me all at once, his fascination with me, the scar, the way he told me I was perfect, and the card. There was no earthly reason for Dylan to have that card. I lost it long before he came into my life. As much as part of me wanted to find another explanation, there was none. Some may think my immediate reaction after having found the card seems extreme or unusual, but it seemed the only thing I could do. I left his apartment and took the card to the police. Things went a bit crazy after that, but in the end, Dylan's fingerprints matched those taken from my belongings almost 2 years before. When the police searched his apartment, they found the mask, the knife, and the sundry other creepy items tucked away in what they dubbed his rape kit. After days of police pressure, Dylan confessed to everything: the rape, the stabbing, and the theft. He admitted that when he saw me on campus, alive, no less, he knew he had to have me because I was perfect. To make matters worse, Dylan swore his attack on me was an act of love born from obsession, and that he had not been active in the year or so we had spent together. In his mind, my strength and survival had meant I was the one, and his abstinence symbolized his commitment to me. As the news spread about Dylan, other women began to come forward, and with his fingerprints and genetic evidence, Dylan was tied to 3 other rapes and 1 other stabbing. Even now, years later, in the early hours of the morning, I lie awake and find myself thinking about all the nights I laid peacefully in his arms, not 10 feet away from the mask, the knife, and my own smiling face. Dylan remains incarcerated for his actions, but given the laxity in our legal system, it is only a matter of time until he finds his way back to prowl the streets once more. 5. This happened about 4 days ago, and I'm young, but that doesn't really matter. I'm a 13-year-old, 8th grade girl named Lucy. I'm about 120 pounds, and I'm 5'1", so I'm a pretty short, chubby girl, but not fat, I'd say. I've been going on a walk up the local elementary school, and through a park. And one day, I had a feeling something wasn't right. I went on my walk wearing an Atari t-shirt and yoga pants. No, I was not trying to show off my butt. But anyway, I was walking for about an hour, and I walked up to the elementary school where there's a U in front of the school to pick up your kids. And I was walking on the sidewalk. It's summer, so nobody should be there. I was the only one there besides a little white Jeep with 2 middle-aged men. Typical creeper look, balding beer belly, and big circle glasses. I walked past them and heard a loud engine start. I turned around and the car is slowly creeping behind me. I'm kinda weirded out, so I walk a tiny bit faster. There's a few bushes in between the U and the little sidewalk for kids who walk home. At the top right corner of the U there's a stop sign, and I cut through the bushes because I was kind of scared. The guys in the car drove up to the stop sign and started yelling at each other things like, "Hey, why did you let her go there?" And, "What do you mean? I didn't do anything." I was freaking out now. I walked behind the school to the basketball court and pulled out my phone, took out the earbuds, and texted 2 of my best friends in a group chat. I'm gonna call them Gabrielle and Kathleen. They immediately responded with, "Call your mom and get away from the school." I got up and started walking through my neighborhood and realized there's someone behind me. I turn around and see the white Jeep. The guy in the passenger seat called out to me, "Hey, can you come here and give us directions?" I ignored them and walked to my friend's house. Her dad's a cop, and realized my ticket to safety, a cop car, in the driveway. When they saw the house, they bolted out of there. I realized I forgot my earbuds at the school, and I loved those earbuds. So I was stupid and I went back to get them. When I got there, the Jeep was back there again, and it was in the parking lot, next to the U. I was horrified. I walked past it calling my friend Kathleen, who lived a few houses away from the school, and she came with a tiny pocket knife, but by the time she got to me, the Jeep pulled up next to me, and the window rolled down. And the man's face was scary as he smiled at me and said, "Good girls get puppies and kittens. Come here. I have a kitten for you." Yeah, he actually said that. My friend Kathleen saw the Jeep as it sped away. Apparently, a few kids have gone missing, and reports of a white Jeep stalking kids in the area are common. Hey everyone, Hellraiser here, and thank you very much for listening to my latest subscribers video. Big thanks go out to the people who sent their stories in to me. If you have sent me a story in recently, don't worry, I will be using it, just obviously not in this particular video. It should make either the next video or the one after, depending on when I received it. I try to do them in order of arrival. Okay, so the rest of the week is looking quite good so far. We'll have, let's see, what day is this? This will be Tuesday. Alright, so tomorrow will be the usual 3 true scary stories. I've got enough stories to do a glitch video on Thursday. Some people have been quite vocal about that, so there will be a glitch video on Thursday. And I'm looking quite good for Paranormal and TIFU on Saturdays, so excellent stuff there. And hopefully you enjoy those videos when they come out. Okay, so I think that'll do for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.